The clock on the wall showed 10 minutes past 9 when Rosa pulled her cleaning cart through the service entrance of the grand concert hall. Her daughter Isabella walked beside her, a small backpack bouncing on her shoulders filled with homework, and a worn-out coloring book. This was their routine now, had been for almost 2 years since Rosa started working the night shift. The concert hall was a world away from their tiny apartment across town. Golden chandeliers hung from ceilings, so high they seemed to touch the clouds, and the walls were covered in deep red velvet that looked like it cost more than Rosa made in a month. Isabella always felt like she was walking into a palace from one of her storybooks. Tonight had been special. The famous pianist Jonathan Rivers had performed to a sold-out crowd of 1,500 people. Rosa had caught glimpses of him during soundcheck earlier in the day, his fingers moving across the piano keys like he was painting music in the air. The audience had given him 3 standing ovations, and even now, hours after the show ended, the energy still seemed to float through the empty hall. Isabella found her usual spot in the corner near the stage, a small fold-out chair that one of the security guards had set up for her months ago. She spread her homework across a music stand that someone had left behind, using it as a makeshift desk. Math problems about addition and subtraction seemed boring compared to the magic that happened in this room every night. Rosa began her work methodically, the way she always did. First, she swept the lobby where people had dropped programs and candy wrappers. Then she moved to the main hall, working row by row, collecting forgotten items and wiping down each seat. She found the usual treasures that audiences left behind: reading glasses, a silk scarf, someone's house keys, and tonight, a child's stuffed elephant that had probably been cried over already. The work was honest and it paid the bills, but Rosa often felt invisible. People rushed past her during the day like she was part of the furniture. The fancy music patrons in their expensive clothes and jewelry never seemed to notice. The woman who made sure their seats were clean and their concert experience was perfect. But Rosa didn't mind being invisible. It meant she could watch and listen without anyone bothering her. Isabella had finished her homework and was now drawing in her coloring book, but her eyes kept drifting to the massive piano that sat center stage. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The wood was so shiny it reflected the stage lights like a black mirror, and the keys looked like perfect white and black teeth and a giant smile. Every night, Isabella listened to the music from her corner. She heard everything: the gentle warm-up scales that musicians played before shows, the complex pieces during performances, and sometimes, late at night, she heard artists practicing alone on stage, working through difficult passages over and over until they got them right. Without realizing it, Isabella had started to understand the music. She knew when notes sounded happy or sad, when they climbed high like birds flying or dropped low like thunder rolling. She could predict which note would come next in familiar pieces, and sometimes she caught herself humming along with melodies she had heard dozens of times. Rosa noticed her daughter's fascination with the music but didn't think much of it. Children were naturally curious about everything, and the piano was certainly the most impressive thing in the room. What she didn't know was that Isabella had been paying attention to much more than just the pretty sounds the little girl had been watching. The pianist's hands studying how their fingers moved across the keys. She noticed that when they pressed the right side of the piano, the sounds were higher, and when they pressed the left side, the sounds were deeper. She saw how they used both hands together to create harmony, and how sometimes they played softly for gentle sounds and pressed harder for bold, dramatic music. Isabella had also been listening to the piano tuner who came every week. She learned that each key had a name, and that the white keys and black keys worked together to make all the different sounds possible. She didn't understand the technical words he used, but she absorbed the idea that the piano was like a language, and if you knew how to speak it, you could say anything you wanted. Tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was because Jonathan Rivers had played with such passion that the whole building seemed to vibrate with leftover music. Maybe it was because Isabella had just turned 8 years old last week and felt more grown up. Or maybe it was simply time for something magical to happen. Rosa was in the backstage area now, cleaning the green rooms where the performers got ready. She always saved this area for last because it was her favorite part of the job. Sometimes she found sheet music that had been left behind, covered with handwritten notes and corrections. She couldn't read music, but she loved looking at all the dots and lines that somehow turned into the beautiful sounds she heard every night. The concert hall was completely quiet now, except for the soft sound of Rosa's cleaning supplies and the distant hum of the building's air conditioning. Isabella had put away her coloring book and was sitting very still in her chair, looking at the piano. The stage lights were still on, making the instrument glow like it was waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Something inside Isabella started pulling her toward the stage. She had never felt anything like it before. It was like the piano was calling to her, asking her to come closer. She looked toward the backstage area where she could hear her mother working, knowing that Rosa would be busy for at least another 20 minutes. Isabella stood up slowly and walked toward the stage steps. Her heart was beating fast, not because she was scared, but because she felt excited in a way she couldn't explain. She climbed the steps carefully, her small sneakers silent on the wooden floor. The piano looked even more magnificent up close. She could see her reflection in the polished surface, and when she got near enough, she could smell the faint scent of wood polish and something else she couldn't identify, but that seemed to be the smell of music itself. Isabella had watched hundreds of pianists sit at this bench. She knew exactly how they positioned themselves, how they adjusted the seat height, how they placed their hands over the keys before they began to play. Without thinking about what she was doing, she climbed onto the bench and sat down. The keys were right there in front of her, beautiful and inviting. She had dreamed about touching them so many times, wondering what they would feel like under her fingers. Would they be smooth or rough, heavy or light? Would they really make the same magical sounds she heard every night? Isabella looked around the empty concert hall one more time. 1,500 empty seats stared back at her like they were waiting for something special to happen. The silence was so complete that she could hear her own breathing. She raised her small hands and gently placed her fingers on the keys, just like she had seen the great pianists do. The keys felt cool and smooth, and when she pressed down very softly, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard filled the air around her. The first note that came from under Isabella's finger was so pure and clear that it seemed to hang in the air like a crystal bell. She pressed another key, then another, listening to how each sound was different but somehow belonged together. Her small fingers moved carefully across the white keys, and she discovered that each one had its own voice, its own personality. For weeks, Isabella had been hearing the same melody over and over in her head. It started about a month ago when the famous composer Vincent Torres had come to practice late one evening. He had played a piece that was sad and beautiful at the same time, something that made Isabella feel like crying and smiling all at once. The melody had stuck in her mind like a favorite song that wouldn't go away. Now, sitting at the piano, Isabella found herself trying to play that melody. She didn't know the name of the piece or anything about music theory. She just knew how it was supposed to sound, and somehow her fingers seemed to know where to go. The first few notes came out hesitant and uncertain, but as she continued, something amazing started to happen. The melody began to flow from her hands like water from a spring. Each note connected to the next one perfectly, and the sound that filled the concert hall was nothing like what anyone would expect from an 8-year-old child who had never had a piano lesson in her life. The music was delicate and emotional, filled with a depth of feeling that seemed impossible for someone so young. Isabella closed her eyes and let the music take over. She could feel the story that the melody was telling, even though there were no words. It spoke of longing and hope, of dreams that seemed far away but never impossible. Her left hand found the lower keys naturally, adding deep, rich notes that supported the melody. Like pillars holding up a beautiful building. The sound of the piano in the empty concert hall was magical. Every note seemed to grow and expand, bouncing off the walls and ceiling before coming back to wrap around Isabella like a warm blanket. She had never felt anything like this before. It was like discovering she could fly, or that she had been carrying a secret superpower inside her all along. As the melody developed, Isabella began to add her own touches to it. Little decorations and variations that felt right, even though she didn't understand why. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence, and the music became more complex and beautiful with each passing moment. She was no longer just copying what she had heard. She was creating something new, something that was uniquely hers. Meanwhile, in the backstage area, Rosa had finished cleaning the main dressing room and was moving to the smaller practice rooms. The building was so well soundproofed that she couldn't hear the piano from where she was working. She was thinking about grocery shopping tomorrow and whether Isabella needed new shoes for school. Money was always tight, but they were managing, and Rosa was grateful for this job that allowed her to keep her daughter close while she worked. Back on stage, Isabella's playing was becoming more adventurous. She discovered the black keys and found that they added colors to the music that she didn't know were possible. Her right hand played the melody while her left hand created a gentle accompaniment, and somehow she knew exactly which notes would sound good together. It was like having a conversation where both people understood each other perfectly without using words. The piece that Isabella was playing had originally been written by Frederick Chopin more than 150 years ago. It was called Nocturne in E-flat major, and it was considered one of the most beautiful and challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Professional pianists spent years learning to play it with the proper technique and emotional expression. Yet here was a child, playing it from memory after hearing it only a few times, bringing her own innocent interpretation to every phrase. What Isabella didn't know was that her version was special in ways that went beyond technical skill. She played with a natural musicality that couldn't be taught in any conservatory. Every note came from her heart, and the emotions she poured into the music were pure and honest. There were no artificial techniques or showing off, just a child sharing the beauty she felt inside through the language of music. As the melody reached its most emotional section, Isabella's playing became even more expressive. Her face showed complete concentration but also joy, as if she had found something she had been looking for her whole life without knowing it was missing. Her small hands stretched to reach octaves that should have been impossible for fingers her size, yet somehow she managed to play everything exactly as it needed to be played. The acoustics of the concert hall made every note perfect. The same space that had hosted the greatest musicians in the world was now witnessing something equally special, a young girl discovering her gift for the first time. The empty seats seemed to lean forward as if they too were listening to this unexpected performance. Isabella's playing told a story without words. It spoke of quiet nights when she lay awake listening to her mother come home from work, of dreams about beautiful places she had never seen, of the music that lived inside her heart and was finally finding a way to come out. Each phrase was like a chapter in a book about hope and wonder and the magic that can happen when someone finds their true calling. The melody began to wind toward its conclusion, and Isabella played the final phrases with a gentleness that made the notes seem to float in the air before slowly fading away. When the last note died out, the silence that followed was different from the silence that had been there before. It was full and rich, like the silence after something important has been said. Isabella sat very still for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. She could hardly believe what had just happened. The music had come from somewhere inside her that she never knew existed, and playing it had felt as natural as breathing. She looked around the empty concert hall and smiled, feeling like she had just shared a wonderful secret with the most beautiful room in the world. She was about to play the melody again when she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps. Not the familiar sound of her mother's soft cleaning shoes, but the harder sound of dress shoes walking across the wooden floor. Someone was coming toward the stage, and Isabella suddenly realized that she might be in terrible trouble for touching the piano. Her heart started beating fast, but not with the same excitement she had felt while playing. Now she was scared. She knew the rules about not touching anything in the concert hall, and the piano was certainly the most important thing in the entire building. What if she had damaged it somehow? What if her mother lost her job because of what Isabella had done? The footsteps were getting closer, and Isabella could hear voices now, too. More than one person was coming toward the stage. She wanted to run, but her legs felt frozen, and besides, there was nowhere to hide. All she could do was sit there and wait to face whatever consequences were coming her way. The first person to appear at the edge of the stage was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He moved slowly, almost carefully, as if he was afraid that walking too fast might break the spell of what he had just heard. Behind him came a woman with long dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her face showing the same expression of wonder and disbelief. The third person was younger, maybe in his 30s, with curly hair and a gentle smile that reached his eyes. Isabella sat frozen on the piano bench, her small hands still resting on the keys where the last notes had faded away. She wanted to apologize, to explain that she hadn't meant any harm, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. These weren't security guards or building managers coming to scold her. These were clearly important people, the kind who belonged in at a place like this. And she was just the janitor's daughter who had broken the rules. The silver-haired man reached the stage first and stopped at the bottom of the steps. Instead of looking angry or upset, his face showed something that Isabella couldn't quite understand. It was like he had just witnessed something magical, something that had surprised him completely. He looked at Isabella for a long moment, then at the piano, then back at her again. "That was extraordinary," he said finally, his voice soft and full of amazement. "What you just played, child, that was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Do you know what that piece is?" Isabella shook her head, not trusting her voice to work properly. She had never heard the name Chopin before, and she didn't know what a nocturne was. All she knew was that she had played a melody that lived in her heart. And now these important-looking people had heard her do it. The woman with the dark hair climbed the steps onto the stage, moving with the grace of someone who had spent years performing in front of audiences. When she reached the piano, she knelt down so she was at Isabella's eye level. Her expression was gentle and encouraging, not frightening at all. "My name is Elena," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that made her words sound like music themselves. "I'm a pianist, and I've been playing for more than 20 years. What you just did up here, the way you played that piece, it was beautiful beyond words. Where did you learn to play like that?" Isabella found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "I just listened," she whispered. "I heard someone play it a few weeks ago, and I remembered how it sounded. I didn't mean to break any rules. I was just curious about how the keys would feel." The younger man with curly hair had joined them on stage now, and he was looking at Isabella with the same expression of amazement as the others. "You learned that entire piece just by listening?" he asked. "You've never had piano lessons?" "No, sir," Isabella replied, her voice getting a little stronger. "My mom and we come here every night while she cleans. I do my homework over there." She pointed to her small chair in the corner, "and I listen to all the music. I love how it sounds, and sometimes I try to remember the melodies." Elena and the silver-haired man exchanged a look that Isabella didn't understand. It was like they were having a conversation without words, the way her mother sometimes communicated with her best friend just by raising an eyebrow or tilting her head. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Elena asked. "Isabella Santos. My mom is Rosa. She's the night cleaner here." Isabella's voice dropped again as she remembered that she might have gotten her mother in trouble. "Please don't be mad at her. She doesn't know I touched the piano. She's working really hard and she needs this job." The silver-haired man, who Isabella would later learn was Dr. James Wellington, one of the most respected piano teachers in the country, sat down on the edge of the stage. "Isabella, you're not in trouble, and neither is your mother. What we just heard was something very special. Can you play the piece again?" Isabella looked at the three adults surrounding her. They didn't seem angry or upset. If anything, they looked excited, like children who had just discovered a treasure chest. Slowly, she turned back to the piano and placed her fingers on the keys. This time, knowing that people were listening, Isabella felt a different kind of nervousness. But as soon as she started playing, the worry melted away. The music took over, again flowing from her fingers like it had been waiting inside the piano all along. She played the same melody, but somehow it sounded even more beautiful than before. Maybe it was because she wasn't afraid anymore, or maybe it was because she could feel the appreciation and wonder of her audience. As Isabella played, Elena found herself fighting back tears. In all her years of professional music, she had never heard anything quite like this. The child's technique was completely untrained, but her musicality was pure and instinctive. She played with the kind of emotional honesty that most pianists spent years trying to achieve. Every note came from her heart, and the result was magic. Dr. Wellington was equally moved. He had taught hundreds of students over his 40-year career, many of whom had gone on to become professional musicians. But he had never encountered natural talent like this. Isabella wasn't just playing the notes correctly. She was interpreting the music with a maturity and sensitivity that seemed impossible for her age. The younger man, whose name was Antonio and who composed music for films and orchestras, was already imagining the possibilities. He could hear in Isabella's playing the seeds of something extraordinary. With the right training and guidance, this child could become one of the great pianists of her generation. When Isabella finished playing, the silence that followed was filled with emotion. Elena reached over and gently placed her hand on Isabella's shoulder. "That was even more beautiful the second time," she said. "Isabella, do you enjoy playing music?" The little girl's face lit up with a smile that answered the question before she even spoke. "It's the most wonderful thing in the world," she said. "When I play, it feels like the music is telling me a story, and I get to help tell it too. It's like having a conversation with someone who understands exactly what I'm feeling." Dr. Wellington stood up slowly, his mind racing with thoughts and possibilities. "Isabella, what we just witnessed is what musicians call perfect pitch and natural musicality. It's very rare, and it's something that can't be taught. You were born with a gift that most people can only dream of having." Isabella looked confused. "A gift? But I don't know how to read music, and I don't know any of the proper ways to hold my hands or sit at the piano. I just play what sounds right to me." "And that," said Antonio, "is exactly what makes it so remarkable. You're playing from your soul, not from a textbook. That's what real music is about." Just then they heard footsteps again, and this time Isabella recognized the sound immediately. It was her mother, finished with her cleaning and coming to collect her daughter for the ride home. Rosa appeared at the edge of the stage area, and when she saw Isabella sitting at the piano surrounded by 3 well-dressed strangers, her face went pale with worry. "Isabella?" she called out, her voice sharp with panic. "Get away from there right now." "I'm so sorry," she said to the adults, hurrying toward the stage. "She knows she's not supposed to touch anything. Please don't report this. I need this job." Elena quickly stood up and walked toward Rosa with her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Please, don't worry. Your daughter isn't in trouble. In fact, we need to talk to you about something very important." Rosa's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had worked cleaning jobs for most of her adult life, and she knew how quickly things could go wrong when boundaries were crossed. The sight of her 8-year-old daughter sitting at the most expensive piano in the city, surrounded by people who clearly belonged in this world of classical music, filled her with a terror that made her hands shake. "Please, I'm begging you," Rosa said, her voice trembling as she approached the group. "Isabella, come down from there right now. We need to go home." She looked at the 3 adults with desperation in her eyes. "She's never done anything like this before. I teach her to respect other people's property. This won't happen again, I promise." Dr. Wellington stepped forward with his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Mrs. Santos, please, there's no need to apologize. Your daughter has done nothing wrong. In fact, what she just did was remarkable beyond anything we could have imagined." Rosa looked confused and still frightened. "I don't understand." She was touching the piano. "She knows the rules about not disturbing anything in the concert hall." Elena moved closer to Rosa, her expression gentle and reassuring. Mrs. Santos. My name is Elena Petrov. I'm a concert pianist, and I've been performing professionally for over 20 years. What your daughter just played was one of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire, and she played it beautifully, entirely from memory, with no formal training whatsoever. That's impossible, Rosa said, shaking her head. Isabella has never had music lessons. We can't afford things like that. She just sits in the corner and does her homework while I work. Antonio, the composer, couldn't contain his excitement any longer. That's exactly what makes this so extraordinary, he said. Your daughter has what we call perfect pitch and natural musicality. She learned that entire piece just by listening to it during performances. Mrs. Santos, what Isabella has is incredibly rare. We're talking about maybe one person in 10,000 who possesses this level of natural ability. Isabella had been watching this conversation with growing anxiety. She could see the fear in her mother's eyes, and she knew that somehow she had caused this problem. She slipped down from the piano bench and ran to her mother's side, wrapping her arms around Rosa's waist. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said, her voice muffled against her mother's work uniform. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to know what the keys felt like. The music was in my head, and I wanted to see if I could make it come out through the piano." Rosa hugged her daughter protectively, still trying to process what these strangers were telling her. "You're saying that Isabella played actual music? Real songs?" Dr. Wellington nodded seriously. "Not just any music? She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, which is considered graduate-level repertoire. Most piano students don't attempt this piece until they've been studying for at least 10 years. "But she's only 8 years old," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what makes this so incredible," Elena replied. "Mrs. Santos, I started playing piano when I was 4 years old. I had the best teachers money could buy, practiced for hours every day, and went to the finest music schools in Europe. I didn't play Chopin with the kind of emotional depth and natural interpretation that Isabella just demonstrated until I was in my 20s. Rosa felt like the world was spinning around her. She had always known that Isabella was a bright child, good at school and quick to learn new things. But this was something completely different. These people were talking about her daughter like she was some kind of miracle. "I need to sit down," Rosa said, and Dr. Wellington quickly pulled over a chair from the wings of the stage dot as Rosa sat down, trying to make sense of everything she was hearing. Isabella looked up at the three musicians with curious eyes. "Is what I did really so special?" she asked. "It felt natural to me, like the music wanted to come out and I just helped it." Elena knelt down to Isabella's level again. "Sweetheart, what you did is what musicians spend their entire lives hoping to achieve. You didn't just play the notes correctly. You played with feeling, with understanding, like you could hear the story that the composer was trying to tell when he wrote that piece." "I could hear the story," Isabella said, her eyes lighting up. "It was about someone missing something beautiful, but also hoping that maybe someday they would find it again." The music felt sad and happy at the same time. Antonio shook his head in amazement. "That's exactly what that piece is about. Chopin wrote it when he was homesick for Poland, missing his homeland but still holding on to hope. Isabella, you understood the emotional content of that music without anyone explaining it to you." Dr. Wellington had been quietly observing this entire exchange, and now he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Santos, I think you need to understand something important. What your daughter has is not just talent. It's what we call a gift. In my 40 years of teaching piano, I've met perhaps 3 or 4 students who possess this level of natural ability." Rosa looked at Isabella, seeing her daughter in a completely new light. "But what does this mean? What are you saying we should do?" "We're saying that Isabella needs proper training," Elena said gently. "This kind of gift, if it's not nurtured and developed, can be lost. Isabella needs to learn proper technique, music theory, and have access to quality instruments and instruction." "But we can't afford piano lessons," Rosa said, her voice breaking slightly. "I work nights cleaning this building and days at a laundromat downtown. After rent and groceries and Isabella's school supplies, there's nothing left for extras like music lessons." The three musicians exchanged glances, and Dr. Wellington spoke first. Mrs. Santos, what if I told you that there might be a way to solve that problem? Rosa looked suspicious. What do you mean? Elena took a deep breath. Mrs. Santos, my husband and I have been looking for a way to give back to the music community. We've been blessed with successful careers, and we've always wanted to help a deserving young musician. When we heard Isabella play tonight, we knew we had found someone special. We'd like to offer to sponsor Isabella's musical education, Dr. Wellington added. Lessons, sheet music, even access to practice instruments. Everything she would need to develop her abilities properly. Rosa stared at them in disbelief. You want to pay for music lessons for a child you just met? Antonio nodded enthusiastically. Mrs. Santos, in the music world, when you encounter a talent like Isabella's, you don't let it slip away. This is bigger than just piano lessons. Your daughter could have a future in music that most people can only dream about. Isabella had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement, but she was also worried about her mother. She could see the uncertainty and fear in Rosa's eyes, and she knew her mother was trying to protect her from disappointment. Mama? Isabella said softly, could I really learn to play even better than I do now? Rosa looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at the three adults who seemed so certain about Isabella's potential. I don't know what to say. This is all happening so fast. Dr. Wellington smiled kindly. You don't have to decide anything tonight. But Mrs. Santos, I'd like you to consider something. Your daughter has been given a rare gift. The question isn't whether she deserves the chance to develop it. The question is whether we, as adults who recognize that gift, have the responsibility to help her nurture it. Elena added, we're not asking you to trust strangers. We can provide references, credentials, anything you need to feel comfortable with this arrangement. What we're asking is that you give Isabella the chance to discover just how far her musical abilities can take her. Rosa felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. For 8 years, she had worked multiple jobs, sacrificed her own needs, and done everything she could to provide for Isabella. She had dreamed of giving her daughter opportunities that she herself had never had, but she had never imagined anything like this. Can I think about it? Rosa asked finally. Of course, Dr. Wellington replied. Take all the time you need. But, Mrs. Santos, I want you to know that what happened here tonight was extraordinary. Your daughter has a gift that comes along perhaps once in a generation. It would be a tragedy for the world if that gift was never allowed to fully blossom. Rosa didn't sleep at all that night. She sat at their small kitchen table long after Isabella had gone to bed, staring at the business cards that the three musicians had given her. Dr. James Wellington, professor of piano at the Royal Academy of Music, Elena Petrov, international concert pianist, Antonio Rivera, composer and music director. These weren't just any people who had wandered into the concert hall. These were some of the most important musicians in the country, and they wanted to help her daughter. The apartment felt even smaller than usual as Rosa tried to process everything that had happened. She kept replaying the conversation in her mind, looking for signs that this was some kind of trick or scam. But the way they had looked at Isabella, the amazement and respect in their voices when they talked about her playing, that couldn't be fake. Rosa had grown up poor herself, the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She had learned early in life that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Rich people didn't just offer to help poor kids out of the goodness of their hearts, at least not in her experience. There had to be a catch somewhere, but then she remembered the look on Isabella's face when she was playing the piano. Rosa had never seen her daughter so focused, so completely absorbed in something. It was like watching Isabella become who she was meant to be, and Rosa had never realized that her quiet, studious little girl had been carrying this incredible gift inside her all along. The next morning, Isabella woke up earlier than usual, her mind buzzing with excitement about the night before. She found her mother still sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the business cards spread out in front of her. "Mama, are you okay?" Isabella asked, Climbing into the chair next to Rosa, Rosa looked at her daughter and felt her heart break a little. Isabella's eyes were bright with hope and possibility, and Rosa knew that whatever decision she made would change both of their lives forever. "Isabella, honey, I need to ask you something important," Rosa said, taking her daughter's small hands in her own. "Do you really want to learn to play piano properly? I mean, really want it, not just think it might be fun for a while?" Isabella's response was immediate and certain. "More than anything in the whole world, Mama. When I was playing last night, it felt like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. It felt like coming home." Rosa nodded slowly. "And you understand that if we say yes to these people, it means your life will be different? You'll have to practice every day, work very hard, and give up some of the time you spend on other things." "I understand," Isabella said seriously. "But Mama, the music feels like it's already inside me, waiting to come out. These people, they could help me learn how to let it out properly." That afternoon, Rosa made a decision that terrified and excited her at the same time. She called Dr. Wellington's number, her hands shaking as she dialed. "Dr. Wellington? This is Rosa Santos, Isabella's mother. We met last night at the concert hall. Mrs. Santos, how wonderful to hear from you. Have you had time to think about our conversation?" Rosa took a deep breath. "I have a lot of questions, and I need to know exactly what you're proposing before." "I can agree to anything." "Of course," Dr. Wellington replied. "Why don't you and Isabella come to my studio tomorrow afternoon? You can see where the lessons would take place, meet some of my other students, and we can discuss all the details." The next day, Rosa and Isabella took 2 buses across town to reach Dr. Wellington's music studio. The building was elegant and intimidating, with marble floors and oil paintings of famous composers lining the walls. Rosa felt completely out of place in her best dress, which was still clearly a cleaning woman's Sunday outfit. Dr. Wellington greeted them warmly and led them through the studio. Isabella's eyes grew wide as they passed practice rooms where students were playing beautiful music on grand pianos that gleamed under soft lighting. The sound of scales and classical pieces floated through the air like a constant symphony. "This is where Isabella would have her lessons," Dr. Wellington explained, opening the door to a bright, airy room with a beautiful baby grand piano in the center. "Each student gets 1 hour of individual instruction per week, plus access to practice rooms whenever they need them." Isabella walked over to the piano and gently touched the keys, the same wonder in her eyes that Rosa had seen that first night. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elena appeared in the doorway, smiling when she saw Isabella at the piano. "I thought I heard familiar voices. Isabella, would you like to try playing something on this piano?" Isabella looked at her mother for permission, and Rosa nodded. What followed was the same magic they had witnessed at the concert hall. Isabella played the Chopin Nocturne again, but this time on an instrument that was perfectly tuned and voiced. The sound that filled the room was even more beautiful than before. When Isabella finished, Elena turned to Rosa with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Santos, I need you to understand something. I've been teaching and performing for over 20 years, and I've never heard anything like what your daughter just did. This isn't just talent, this is genius." Dr. Wellington nodded in agreement. "Mrs. Santos, let me be completely honest with you about what we're proposing. We want to provide Isabella with the finest musical education available. That includes weekly lessons with me, monthly master classes with Elena, composition lessons with Antonio, and eventually, if she continues to progress, opportunities to perform with youth orchestras and in student recitals." Rosa felt overwhelmed. "But why? Why would you do all this for a child you barely know?" Antonio, who had joined them in the practice room, answered her question. "Mrs. Santos, in the music world, we have a responsibility to nurture exceptional talent when we find it. Isabella has the potential to become one of the great pianists of her generation. But more than that, she has something that can't be taught, the ability to touch people's hearts through music." "What would this cost?" Rosa asked, afraid to hear the answer. "Nothing," Elena replied firmly. "We've discussed this among ourselves, and we've agreed to cover all expenses. Lessons, sheet music, performance opportunities, everything. The only thing we ask in return is that Isabella commits to working hard and taking this seriously." Rosa looked at Isabella, who was running her fingers silently over the piano keys, lost in her own world of music and possibility. "Isabella, do you understand what these people are offering you?" Isabella nodded solemnly. "They're offering to teach me how to play all the music I hear in my head. They're offering to help me become the person I think I'm supposed to be." Rosa felt her last resistance crumble. How could she deny her daughter this opportunity? How could she let her own fears and doubts hold Isabella back from something that could change her entire life? "There's one condition," Rosa said finally, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to understand everything that's happening. I want regular updates on Isabella's progress, and if at any point I feel like this isn't right for her, we stop. No questions asked." Dr. Wellington smiled. "That's exactly what any good parent should ask for, Mrs. Santos. You have my word that Isabella's well-being will always come first." Elena knelt down next to Isabella at the piano. "So what do you say? Are you ready to begin your musical journey?" Isabella looked at her mother, then at the three adults who had already changed her life simply by recognizing her gift. "When can we start?" The room filled with laughter and excitement as Rosa realized that she had just said yes to the most important decision of her daughter's life. She was terrified, but she was also hopeful in a way she hadn't been for years. Maybe, just maybe, dreams really could come true. 3 weeks after that life-changing evening at the concert hall, Isabella's world had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Her first official piano lesson with Dr. Wellington had revealed just how much natural ability she possessed, but also how much she had to learn about proper technique and music theory. Dr. Wellington had been teaching piano for 4 decades, but he approached Isabella's lessons with the excitement of a beginner himself. Every session brought new discoveries about what this remarkable child could accomplish. Isabella's fingers were small, but they were incredibly agile and seemed to know instinctively how to find the right keys. Her ear was so perfect that she could identify any note or chord the moment she heard it. "Isabella," Dr. Wellington said during her 3rd lesson, "I want to try something different today. I'm going to play a piece you've never heard before, and I want you to listen carefully. Then I want you to try playing it back to me." Isabella nodded eagerly. She had grown more confident with each lesson, and the initial fear of being in trouble had been replaced by pure joy at learning new things about music. Dr. Wellington sat at the piano and played a beautiful piece by Bach, something complex and intricate that would normally take months for a student to learn. When he finished, Isabella closed her eyes for a moment as if she was replaying the music in her mind. Then she moved to the piano and began to play. What came out wasn't perfect. Her small hands couldn't quite reach all the notes that Dr. Wellington had played, but the melody, the rhythm, and the spirit of the piece were all there. She had absorbed the essence of Bach's composition. In just one listening, Dr. Wellington sat back in his chair, shaking his head in amazement. "Isabella, what you just did should be impossible. That piece has intricate hand positions and complex timing that most students need months to master." Isabella looked worried. "Did I do something wrong? I know I couldn't reach all the notes, but I played what I could hear." "No, sweetheart, you did something miraculous," Dr. Wellington replied. "You just proved that your musical gift is even more extraordinary than we first thought." Meanwhile, Elena had been working with Isabella on the emotional aspects of music. During their monthly sessions, she taught Isabella that playing piano wasn't just about hitting the right notes at the right time. It was about telling stories, sharing feelings, and connecting with the people who were listening. "Music is a language," Elena explained during one of their lessons. "Just like you use words to tell someone how you feel, you can use music to share emotions that are too deep for words. When you played that Chopin piece the first night we met you, you weren't just playing notes. You were telling us a story about longing and hope." Isabella absorbed these lessons like a sponge soaking up water. She began to understand that each composer had their own personality, their own way of expressing themselves through music. Mozart was playful and clever, Bach was mathematical and precise, Chopin was romantic and emotional. As she learned pieces by different composers, she started to develop her own interpretive voice. Bringing something uniquely hers to everything she played, Antonio had been equally impressed with Isabella's natural musical instincts. During their composition lessons, he discovered that she didn't just have the ability to reproduce music. She could create her own original pieces that were surprisingly sophisticated for someone her age. "Isabella," Antonio said during one of their sessions, "I want you to close your eyes and think about your favorite place in the whole world. Now, try to create music that sounds like that place feels to you." Isabella thought for a moment, then began to play a gentle, flowing melody that seemed to dance and sparkle like sunlight on water. The music was peaceful but also full of life, capturing something beautiful and serene. "That's the park where my mom and I go on Sunday afternoons," Isabella explained when she finished playing. "There's a pond with ducks and the sun comes through. The trees in patches and everything feels safe and happy there." Antonio listened to Isabella's improvisation with growing excitement. "Isabella, you just composed an original piece of music that perfectly captured a mood and a place. Do you understand how remarkable that is?" But perhaps the most important change in Isabella's life was the arrival of her own piano. Elena and her husband had arranged for a beautiful upright piano to be delivered to the small apartment that Isabella and Rosa shared. It wasn't a grand piano like the ones at the concert hall, but it was a quality instrument that had been lovingly maintained and perfectly tuned. The day the piano arrived, Isabella could hardly contain her excitement. The delivery men had to remove the front door to get the instrument into the apartment, and suddenly their small living room was transformed into a music studio. Rosa watched her daughter run her hands over the piano keys with the same reverence that other children might show toward a beloved pet. "Is it really ours, Mama?" Isabella asked, her voice filled with wonder. "It's really yours," Rosa replied, still hardly believing that this was their life now. "Elena said it's yours to keep, no matter what happens." That first night with the piano in their apartment, Isabella played until nearly midnight. Rosa didn't have the heart to stop her, especially when she saw how happy her daughter was. The neighbors in their building, instead of complaining about the noise, began opening their doors and windows to listen. Mrs. Chun from upstairs knocked on their door to tell Rosa how beautiful the music was. Mr. Rodriguez from next door said that Isabella's playing made him feel hopeful for the first time since his wife had passed away. Isabella quickly established a practice routine that amazed even her teachers. She woke up an hour early every morning to play scales and technical exercises before school. After homework in the evening, she spent another 2 hours working on the pieces that Dr. Wellington had assigned, and then she would improvise her own music until Rosa told her it was time for bed. The most remarkable thing was that Isabella never seemed to get tired of practicing. While other children her age had to be forced to do their homework or clean their rooms, Isabella approached the piano with joy every single day. Playing music wasn't work for her, it was like breathing. Something natural and necessary that brought her peace and happiness. Rosa began to notice changes in herself as well. Coming home from her cleaning jobs to the sound of beautiful music transformed their small apartment into something magical. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when Isabella practiced, and she started to understand why people paid so much money to attend concerts. Having live music in her home every day felt like a luxury beyond anything she had ever imagined. The other change was in how people treated them. When Rosa told her coworkers about Isabella's lessons with famous musicians, she saw a new respect in their eyes. When Isabella's teachers at school learned about her musical abilities, they began to see her as special rather than just another quiet student. The family was no longer invisible in the way that poor people often are. Isabella's gift had given them a new identity and a new place in the world, but perhaps the most important change was the one that Dr. Wellington, Elena, and Antonio noticed in themselves. Working with Isabella had reminded them why they had fallen in love with music in the first place. Her pure joy and natural talent had rekindled their own passion for their art. They found themselves practicing more, listening more carefully, and approaching their own music with some of the wonder and excitement that Isabella brought to every lesson. Working with Isabella has made me a better musician, Elena confided to Dr. Wellington after one of their sessions. She reminds me that music isn't about impressing people or winning competitions. It's about sharing something beautiful with the world. 6 months had passed since Isabella first touched the piano at the concert hall, and her progress had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. What started as one remarkable evening had grown into something that was capturing the attention of the entire local music community. Word was spreading about the young girl who could play Chopin like a seasoned professional, and people were beginning to take notice. Isabella's transformation wasn't just musical, it was personal too. The shy, quiet girl who used to sit in the corner doing homework while her mother cleaned had blossomed into a confident young musician who carried herself with a new sense of purpose. She still helped her mother and kept up with her schoolwork, but now she had something that made her feel special, something that was uniquely hers. Dr. Wellington had started bringing colleagues to Isabella's lessons, not to show off, but because he needed other experienced teachers to witness what they were all seeing. Professor Catherine Mills from the conservatory sat through an entire lesson with her mouth open, watching Isabella sight-read a piece by Beethoven that she had never seen before and play it almost perfectly on the first try. "James," Professor Mills whispered to Dr. Wellington after the lesson, "in 30 years of teaching, I've never seen anything like this. She's not just talented, she's a musical genius." Elena had begun recording some of Isabella's practice sessions, partly to track her progress, but mostly because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. These recordings were starting to circulate among professional musicians, and the reactions were always the same: amazement, disbelief, and excitement about what this young girl might accomplish in the years to come. One particularly memorable session happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Isabella was working on a piece by Rachmaninoff, something that most professional pianists found challenging. Her small hands couldn't quite reach the full octave stretches that the piece required, but she had figured out creative ways to modify the fingering while maintaining the emotional impact of the music. "Isabella," Elena said during that lesson, "I want you to try something. Pretend you're telling a story about the most exciting adventure you can imagine. Use the piano to tell that story without words." Isabella's face lit up with concentration, and she began to play an improvised piece that was unlike anything Elena had ever heard from a child. The music started quietly, like someone tiptoeing through a mysterious forest, then built to dramatic crescendos that sounded like racing through mountain passes and flying over vast oceans. The piece ended with a gentle, satisfied melody that felt like coming home after a grand adventure. When Isabella finished, Elena realized she had been holding her breath. "Isabella, that was incredible. Where did that music come from?" "I don't know," Isabella replied honestly. "Sometimes when I sit at the piano, it feels like the music is already there, waiting for me to find it. I just have to listen carefully and let my fingers follow what I hear in my head." Antonio had been equally amazed by Isabella's compositional abilities. During their sessions, she had created several original pieces that were sophisticated beyond her years. One piece, which she called Mama's Lullaby, was inspired by the songs that Rosa hummed while doing household chores. Another, titled Morning Sunshine, captured the feeling of waking up excited about a new day. "Isabella," Antonio said during one of their composition lessons, "I think it's time for you to hear how your music sounds when other people play it." He had arranged for a violinist friend to join them, and together they performed one of Isabella's compositions as a piano and violin duet. Hearing her own music performed by professional musicians brought tears to Isabella's eyes. "That's really something I created?" she asked in wonder. "That's all you," Antonio confirmed. "Isabella, you're not just learning to play music, you're learning to create it. That's something very special." The most significant development came when Dr. Wellington made an announcement that would change everything. "Isabella," he said at the beginning of one of their lessons, "I've been talking with some colleagues about organizing a small recital. Nothing fancy, just a chance for you to perform for a few people who appreciate good music." Isabella's eyes widened with excitement and nervousness. A real performance? On stage? A real performance, Dr. Wellington confirmed. But only if you feel ready. There's no pressure, and it would be a very friendly audience, mostly other music teachers and some of our advanced students. Isabella didn't hesitate. I want to do it. I want to share the music with other people. Rosa had mixed feelings about the idea of Isabella performing in public. Part of her was incredibly proud of her daughter's progress, but another part of her worried about putting so much pressure on an 8-year-old child. Are you sure she's ready for something like that? She asked Dr. Wellington privately. Mrs. Santos, Dr. Wellington replied gently, Isabella is ready for things that most musicians twice her age aren't ready for. But more importantly, she wants to share her gift. That desire to communicate through music is what separates good musicians from great ones. The news of Isabella's upcoming recital began to spread through the music community faster than anyone had expected. Elena mentioned it to a colleague at the symphony, who told another musician, who mentioned it to a music journalist. Within a week, there were people calling Dr. Wellington's studio asking about tickets to hear The Miracle Child, who had been discovered at the concert hall. Dr. Wellington realized that what he had planned as a small, intimate gathering was turning into something much bigger. I think we might have underestimated how much interest there would be in Isabella's performance, he told Elena and Antonio during one of their planning meetings. Maybe that's a good thing, Elena replied. Isabella has a gift that deserves to be heard. If people are excited about her music, shouldn't we give them the chance to experience it? As word continued to spread, some unexpected people began expressing interest in Isabella's recital. The director of the Youth Symphony called to ask if Isabella might be interested in performing with the orchestra sometime in the future. A recording studio owner offered to make a professional recording of her performance. Several music schools sent representatives to inquire about Isabella's plans for formal musical education. Isabella herself seemed remarkably calm about all the attention. When Rosa told her that important people were interested in hearing her play, Isabella simply nodded and said, Good, I hope the music makes them happy. The one concern that everyone shared was making sure that Isabella remained grounded and focused on her love of music rather than getting caught up in the excitement and attention. Dr. Wellington, Elena, and Antonio had all seen talented young musicians whose careers were damaged by too much pressure too early. The most important thing, Elena explained to Rosa, is that Isabella continues to play because she loves it, not because people expect her to. The moment this stops being fun for her, we need to step back and reassess. But there was no sign that Isabella's enthusiasm was diminishing. If anything, she seemed more excited about music than ever. She had started composing more complex pieces, and her technical skills were advancing so rapidly that Dr. Wellington sometimes had to scramble to find new music that would challenge her appropriately. One evening, as Isabella practiced in their small apartment, Rosa sat listening and marveling at how much their lives had changed. 6 months ago, she had been worried about paying the electricity bill and making sure Isabella had enough notebooks for school. Now, her daughter was preparing for a public recital that professional musicians were talking about across the city. Mama, Isabella called from the piano, come listen to this new piece I'm working on. I think you'll like it. Rosa walked over to the piano and sat beside her daughter on the bench. Isabella began to play a beautiful, gentle melody that somehow captured all the love and hope that Rosa felt when she looked at her child. It was a piece about family, about dreams coming true, about the magic that can happen when people believe in each other. As the last notes faded away, Rosa hugged Isabella tightly. That was beautiful, sweetheart. What are you going to call it? Isabella smiled. I'm going to call it Thank You, because that's what I want to say to everyone who helped make this possible. The morning of Isabella's first public recital arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the windows of their small apartment. Rosa had barely slept, her mind racing with excitement and worry about the day ahead. Isabella, on the other hand, had slept peacefully and woke up with the same calm confidence she brought to everything musical in her life. Are you nervous, sweetheart? Rosa asked as she helped Isabella get dressed in the beautiful navy blue dress that Elena had bought especially for this occasion. Isabella thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, Mama, I'm excited. Today I get to share all the music that's been growing inside me. It feels like giving presents to people. The recital was being held at the same concert hall where Isabella had first discovered her gift 9 months earlier. Dr. Wellington had originally planned for maybe 30 people to attend, but word had spread so far through the music community that they were expecting over 200 guests. The small recital had grown into something that felt like a major event. When Isabella and Rosa arrived at the concert hall 3 hours before the performance, Isabella ran straight to the piano on stage. It was the same beautiful Steinway grand, where she had first played that magical night. She sat down and played a few scales, smiling as the familiar sound filled the empty hall. "It sounds just like I remembered," she said to Dr. Wellington, who had been watching her with paternal pride. "Isabella," Dr. Wellington said gently, "I want you to know that today isn't about proving anything to anyone. Today is about sharing your love of music with people who will appreciate it. Play the way you always play, from your heart." Elena arrived shortly after, carrying a bouquet of white roses for Isabella. "These are from all of us," she said, "but mostly they're to remind you that you're already our little star, no matter what happens today." As the afternoon progressed, people began arriving at the concert hall. Isabella peeked out from backstage and was amazed to see so many familiar faces. There were her neighbors from the apartment building, including Mrs. Chun and Mr. Rodriguez, her third-grade teacher. Mrs. Patterson was there with several other teachers from school. The security guards and maintenance staff from the concert hall had all come to hear. The janitor's daughter, who had become their local celebrity, but there were also faces Isabella didn't recognize, important-looking people in expensive clothes, who spoke in hushed, respectful tones about music and technique. Dr. Wellington explained that these were professors from music schools, directors of youth orchestras, and even a few professional musicians who had heard about Isabella's extraordinary abilities. Antonio found Isabella in the green room about an hour before the performance. "How are you feeling, little composer?" he asked. "I keep thinking about that first night when I touched the piano," Isabella replied. "I was so scared that I would get in trouble, and now all these people are coming to hear me play. It feels like a dream." "Dreams have a way of coming true when you work hard and have people who believe in you," Antonio said. "And Isabella, there are a lot of people who believe in you?" As the time for the recital approached, Rosa stood in the wings watching her daughter warm up. Isabella looked so small sitting at the enormous piano, but when she played she seemed to grow larger, filling the entire space with her presence and her music. The concert hall was packed when Dr. Wellington walked onto the stage to introduce Isabella. The audience included everyone from conservatory professors to neighbors who had never attended a classical music performance before. The excitement in the room was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Wellington began, "9 months ago, none of us knew that we were about to discover one of the most remarkable musical talents of our generation. What you're about to hear is not just exceptional skill, it's pure musical genius expressed through the hands and heart of a 9-year-old girl." When Isabella walked onto the stage, the audience fell completely silent. She looked so young and small, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She curtsied politely to the audience, then took her place at the piano. The first piece she played was the Chopin Nocturne that had started everything. As the opening notes filled the concert hall, Isabella was transported back to that first magical night. But now, after months of proper training, her technique was flawless. While her natural musicality had only grown deeper and more expressive, the audience was mesmerized from the very first note. Professional musicians who had come expecting to hear a talented child were instead witnessing something extraordinary. Isabella's playing had a maturity and emotional depth that defied her age. Every phrase was perfectly shaped. Every note had meaning and purpose. As the nocturne ended, the silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Then the audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. Isabella smiled and bowed, then moved on to her second piece, a batch invention that showcased her incredible technical precision. The program continued with pieces by Mozart, Beethoven, and Rachmaninoff. Each performance was met with increasingly enthusiastic applause. But the moment that truly stunned the audience came when Isabella performed one of her own compositions, the piece she called Thank You that she had written for her mother. As Isabella played her original music, Rosa felt tears streaming down her face. The melody was beautiful and sophisticated, but more than that, it told the story of their journey together. It spoke of late nights in the concert hall, of dreams that seemed impossible, of the love between a mother and daughter who had supported each other through everything. When the piece ended, many people in the audience were crying. This wasn't just a performance. It was a young artist sharing her soul with the world, and everyone in the room could feel the sincerity and love in every note. The final piece of the recital was an improvisation. Isabella had asked if she could play something that she made up on the spot. Inspired by the energy and emotion of the audience, Dr. Wellington had been nervous about this idea, but Elena had convinced him that Isabella's gift for spontaneous composition was part of what made her special. Isabella closed her eyes and began to play music that seemed to capture the feeling of the entire evening. It started with gentle, questioning phrases that grew into bold, joyful melodies. The music spoke of gratitude, of hope, of a young girl who had found her calling and wanted to share it with the world. As the improvisation built to its climax, Isabella opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. She could see her mother in the wings, crying with pride. She could see Dr. Wellington, Elena, and Antonio beaming with joy. She could see neighbors and teachers and strangers, all united by the music she was creating in real time. The final notes of the improvisation faded away, and for a moment the concert hall was completely silent. Then the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 5 minutes. People were shouting, "Bravo!" and "Magnificent!" Some were crying, others were laughing with joy. Isabella stood and bowed repeatedly, overwhelmed by the response. When the applause finally died down, she spoke into the microphone that Dr. Wellington had set up for her. "Thank you," she said, in her clear young voice. 9 months ago, I was just a little girl who loved to listen to music while my mama worked. Tonight I got to share my music with all of you. This is the happiest day of my life. After the recital, the green room was filled with people wanting to meet Isabella and congratulate her. Music school directors offered scholarships. Orchestra conductors invited her to perform as a soloist, and recording companies asked about making albums of her music. But the moment that meant the most to Isabella came when Mrs. Chun, her elderly neighbor, took her hands and said, "Isabella, your music made me feel young again. It reminded me of all the beautiful things in the world that I had forgotten about. Thank you for that gift." As they drove home that night, Rosa and Isabella sat quietly in the back seat of Dr. Wellington's car, both exhausted but glowing with happiness. "Mama," Isabella said softly, "do you think Papa would have been proud of me tonight?" Isabella's father had died when she was very young, and she rarely spoke about him. Rosa hugged her daughter close. "Sweetheart, your papa would have been the proudest person in that entire concert hall, and you know what? I think he was watching tonight, and I think he was smiling." Isabella nodded and rested her head against her mother's shoulder. In just 9 months, she had gone from being the invisible janitor's daughter to being recognized as one of the most promising young musicians in the country. But the thing that mattered most to her hadn't changed at all. She still loved music more than anything else in the world. And now she had the chance to share that love with everyone around her. As they pulled up to their apartment building, Isabella could see light coming from their window where her piano waited for her. Tomorrow there would be new music to learn, new pieces to compose, and new dreams to chase. But tonight she was simply a 9-year-old girl who had shared her gift with the world and had been embraced with more love and appreciation than she had ever imagined possible.